So my name is Fernando. I am joining you guys from the other side of the planet. Most of you probably are in the US or around there. I am based in Japan, in Kyoto. And so yeah, it's 12 in the morning here. It's midnight. So I would imagine it's good morning for most of you, but good afternoon or good evening or whatever the time it is for you, wherever you're based. And thank you for joining. I'm going to put the recording from here on. So please be aware that this is going to be recorded. I haven't decided yet whether this is going to be. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here. It's a pleasure. I especially want to thank Douglas for being here. Douglas, I wouldn't be here myself if it weren't for you. So thank you very much for not only being the sponsor, but also for being such a source of inspiration for me. You really have been a source of inspiration. I will get back to that at some point, but thank you very much. So also I want to thank the Carter School for having me. This is a very beautiful event happening yearly since I understand the 2020s when the pandemic hit, and the Carter School decided to start doing these Peace Weeks online. I think it's a wonderful event. It's a wonderful opportunity for us to come together and share what we're doing and what we're learning and what we're researching about. Thank you to the Carter School for this opportunity. And as you know, the topics of this development and security. I mean, these are the two topics that I picked up, and I thought that the idea of peace building within this context was something worth researching. For me, this is something that was new, so I hope that will be of interest for everybody. So with that being said, as a quick form of intro, the one thing I wanted to say is the idea of peace building for me with this particular issue of the LGBTQ community in general is something that is new. So please do feel free to come into the conversation and correct me whenever you see that there's something that is not correct, or that I'm mentioning something that you see not correct in any ways. So I'm super open to learning. So please if you're constructive and bringing positive things into this conversation, please feel free to unmute yourself and bring it in, or then otherwise we can take it to the Q&A at the end. So well, the main issue that I will be talking about is how I see the issue of genocide. And this is where I mentioned before, Douglas was my professor and basically my mentor in issues of genocide, which I did the course in the Carter School last year. And the idea of genocide is something that is new to me too. So I'm happy to see that this is like coming through in a kind of evolution way. So with that being said, I would like to move to the next slide. And probably you've seen this picture before. And I would like to please unmute yourself and tell me what you see here. What is it that we're seeing, and what is it that we are thinking when you see this picture? Can anybody have any comments on this? Please go ahead and unmute yourselves. And
it signifies erasing culture.
Erasing culture
and
there.
Art, yeah.
Arts, okay. Any other? That's correct. Yeah, that's what I see too. But is there any other thing? Any other ideas come out of this picture?
I would also add the cultural narrative in dictating how we remember our history.
I think that that's exactly the point, like the narratives and how we remember. I think that that's a wonderful point. Yeah. Yeah, the one thing that I see here is that we in the present believe that what happened in the past is kind of useless or kind of meaningless, or because we don't understand it, we kind of like let it go. And if that were the case, that would be okay, because if we let go, but then we let it survive, then next generations could still have access to it. But we, as the people living in the present, we tend to have this authority to think that because we are here now, we have the right to choose what happens with this. And we don't realize that we are deleting the possibility for new generations to see what was there before. So yeah, the one thing that I see here is the use of authority, how we use authority because we live now, and how this can affect peoples in the past and peoples in the future. That was kind of my take on this picture. Then next, I would like to share more or less what we're going to go through in this hour that we have together. The agenda for today would be a little bit, tiny bit of positionality and why I'm doing this. In order to understand genocide, one of the things that I had to learn, and that was a beautiful learning experience, was learning about Stanton's framework of genocide, what it means and how it works. And then I will be applying that and criticizing that framework on basis of the LGBTQ community and the experiences of people here, I mean, in this collective. And then noting the fact that not all genocides are the same. It just happens in different ways. And then connecting directly to this Peace Week event, I want to talk a little bit about the idea of selective peace building, and that not all peace building is always such a good thing as we believe, and that I actually think that in some ways, peace building may also be contributing to genocides, which is kind of like a contradiction in itself. And then lastly, if there's any peace building for all, if there's any way to revise this idea of peace building and how can we build it towards the future in a different way. So with no further ado, I'll just jump into the actual presentation. And the first thing that I wanted to share is like why I am doing this. So in terms of positionality, I would say, okay, I am a gay man coming from Argentina. And one of the things that got me here was the fact that, as I mentioned before, I did a course on the concept of the person with Douglas. And this course definitely made me think of LGBTQ in a different way. I had always been part of the community, or not the community, but as a gay person myself, I was never really connected. So this idea of learning who a person is and what the person means and what rights and responsibilities come along was something that was really given by this course. I personally do feel that I've been very shielded and very disconnected, perhaps because I'm very comfortable or because I have unseen privileges. But I do feel that the LGBTQ issues have been going on for a while, but I've never been related to them in an academic point of view, from an academic point of view. So this was an opportunity for me to start digging into the issue in itself and how I relate to that issue. So for me, again, the concept of the person, that class was a very eye-opening experience in the sense of digging into my own personal issues and my own personal connections to the topic. And then because of the fact that this Peace Week topic is bridging peace building development, that for me kind of resonated in my heart as I was thinking of what I learned in the Carter School this last year, mainly in terms of peace building, what it is and how it works. And then this connected to me to the issue of security, and specifically security for LGBTQ people. How do these two monsters connect, and how do these two issues connect or do not? And actually, one of the things that I was kind of sad to find out is that in many ways they don't. So my starting point in the research upon which I'm doing this presentation relates to why societies hate us so much. And in this, I mean, I do see a pattern of hatred against the LGBTQ collective throughout history. It's not just a modern problem, but it's something that has been going on for a long time. I have an older brother who hasn't talked to me in 30 years. He actually outed me out. He outed me when he found out that I was gay, and he put me in a very awkward situation with my family. I thought that I would lose my family, and we haven't spoken since. So I feel it very especially directly, this feeling of hatred. And although I never did anything to him that I know of, it's kind of hard. He hates you and you have no reason or not knowledge of why that happens. And then when you make that same idea more open to society as a whole, then it becomes like, why is this happening? Like, what is wrong with us all? Or what are we, the LGBTQ plus community, doing that is so bad for everybody? Then the other thing that got me interested in this issue was the fact that throughout history, you can see that the community has always been attacked one way or another, not always and not every place, but in general, there has been a trend towards kind of putting the LGBTQ plus community aside, or as we call it in Argentina, they have disappeared us. Again, this is a word that for me as an Argentinian kind of burns my skin, because this is what happened during the military regime in the 70s and 80s, that people were just disappeared. Nobody knew what happened to them. And we continue to see this, not just in Argentina, but around the world. No? Then thinking of these ideas made me think of, is there some kind of LGBTQ plus form of genocide happening that we're not aware of? And if that is the case, what is it and how is it happening? And then this took me to the idea of going back to the Peacebuilding, the Peace Week of this season, which is the idea of peacebuilding in itself. And that made me think, is it possible that creating genocide? Like, is it possible that we're not, that these are things that are happening and we're not seeing it? And my data kind of shows that way. So the first thing I will do is a very quick intro to Stanton's framework of the 10 stages of genocide. I'm not going to stop in all of this specifically, but basically one of the things that for me was very interesting to learn about this idea of understanding genocide as stages made me think in a way as a progression. This is when you think of genocide, you tend to think of Rwanda or Cambodia or the Holocaust. And although Stanton times and times again says that genocide is a process, it is not an event, and that stages may overlap and repeat, when you read the whole stage, the whole process, the whole stages, you kind of see a progression. Like first is classification, is us versus them. Then is the symbolization when the marking of the them is very clear. Then there is discrimination when laws and the system become more entrenched in the idea of making us separated. Then there's a dehumanization when people start putting, like propaganda comes out and then they're pointing the finger on who is different and why. And then the organization relates to how the state usually becomes an organization that specifically puts laws or systems that are meant to demonize and dehumanize and discriminate people on the different sides of the spectrum. No? Then polarization has to do with probably for most of us who are related to the US or living in the US, you can see a very strong polarization. The same happens in Europe. Like there's a big divide in what is wrong and what is right. Then there's preparation, which means that in itself and the organizations start working in such a way that all the previous stages become stronger and more solidified or even legal. Then there's the persecution process when mainly, but not only, the structure of the state becomes the structure that goes after those who are different. And then the extermination, we have seen this, for example, in Nazi Germany, when the state actually took the lead in actually killing of certain specific kind of people, in the case of the LGBTQ people, but we have also seen it in like many of the other genocides. And then there's the 10th stage, which is denial, which is the lack of taking responsibility of what happened. Like after the genocide is over or finished, there's no reconciliation, there's no process for justice. And unfortunately, one of the things that I came across as I was doing my own research on this is that this denial also happens in democracies, in very highly developed democracies. So this is, in a nutshell, what the framework presented by the statements is about what genocide is. So the one thing that for me was interesting about this process is that you see the difference of how data for genocide can be either incremental or cumulative. So as events start to happen, then you start seeing that this might be a genocide. So it's the understanding of the data that leads to the definition or the understanding of what is happening. And when you think of data, this is not related to Stanton in itself, but the interesting thing about data is that you can understand events that. So this is statistical ways in which you can present how, for example, killings are happening or how discrimination is happening. So you kind of measure the events over time. And depending on how you look at it, it could be accumulative, and then you have the graph on the left, which is slowly increasing. It can be incremental, which is more related to the short term, like what are the events that happen in this month as compared to the previous month? How many people were killed this month as compared to last month, and so on. And then the last one is cumulative. The one on the right is accumulative. So it's a sum of all the events put together. So in a way, this is how you can understand genocide when you think of the process presented by Stanton. So then, with that quick intro, what I wanted to do is to move forward. And this is one of the things that I was doing in the class with Douglas on the concept of the persons. So I started like crossing the idea of how is the Stanton framework working for the LGBTQ+. If we think of genocide as the killing of one particular group or the disappearing of one particular group, then the framework should hold. That was my hypothesis. So I started looking into each. I'm not going to go in detail of this, but each of the stages. So I looked at the stage of classification and LGBTQ+, and how did it happen? So there's the idea of dividing people, us versus them. And then the approach that I took was like, what is the data historically that shows that this happened, and what is the data that is showing this happening today? So what you see, I'm not going to go in detail, but what you see in the light blue color under the classification is the examples that show exactly what I'm saying. Like in Stanton's view, the classification of the LGBTQ people did happen. So for example, during the German regimes of the Nazis, that was happening when they would call gays the degenerates. But the other thing that I did this here was not only doing historically, but also regionally. So of course you see this happening in Europe, but also you see it in Asia. For example, what happened in India with the Section 377, which was inherited by India from the UK during the colonial period. And then more recently, what is happening in Uganda and the Homosexual Act criminalization of 2023. So in a way, the data is suggesting that this classification that Stanton thought understanding genocide applies. So my data kind of applies. Like I said before, I'm not going to go in all the details of all of them, but then in the case of symbolization, how we see the others, and the best example of this is the pink triangle that the Nazis were using on the gays while they were in power. And then in the case of discrimination and denying rights, this is something that is very clear happening, for example, with in Canada during the 50s and 60s, there was this policy called the fruit machine, in which they explicitly put gay people or LGBTQ people out of view, like they completely put them away from any system. We saw this in the US, for example, during the MacArthur period. No? So these are, again, examples of, in the next stage, which is dehumanization and denying humanity and portraying them as evil. Again, we see it both historically in cases like it happened in Zimbabwe, or like more recently in North America, what happened with lavender skirt in the US, or in China, being where homosexuality is or was considered a mental illness until 2001. So this is pretty recent ways of seeing that dehumanization continues to happen. Then for the next stage, which is organization and planning of violence, we see again historical examples like in Germany, and then more recent examples like it happens in Iran today with the morality police that is actually hunting the LGBTQ+ community. I had the chance to be in Iran not long ago, and I met a couple of gay friends, and the fear that these people fear is real. So the organization of the state behind this hunting of LGBTQ people is actually quite real. Then there's the issue of polarization. I don't think I need to tell you much about this. For those of you who are in the US or related to the US, this is very clearly happening today. Then continuing with the next stages, which is preparation, which is identifying and targeting the victims. In this, you see, again, historical cases like Franco in Spain during the 30s or 40s. And then you see this happening in Cuba, for example, in the 70s. And then you still see it today happening in, for example, when the Egyptian police are trapping LGBTQ people using dating apps. So, for example, the Egyptian police will go into apps like Grindr, and then they will engage on a date with somebody, and then they will actually arrest these people. Unfortunately, I saw that something very similar is happening in the US today. I just saw it today on TikTok. Then there's the issue of persecution, harassment, imprisonment. Again, this is happening both historically everywhere and geographically everywhere, and in the present it continues to happen. So this, as far as it goes to here, the framework by Stanton's clearly apply both currently and historically. And then the extermination and the killing. Obviously, the clear example of this is the extermination of Nazis in the camps, in the extermination camps, where something like 15,000 LGBTQ people were killed. But this continues to happen today in the examples that is given, that you can find data that LGBTQ people are actually hunted, is Brazil. Brazil is seen as one of the most dangerous places. However, I will show you something that is interesting about Brazil. Brazil has a lot of data, whereas there's no data about, say, DRC. So does that lack of data mean that nothing is happening in DRC? I have a big question mark there. So Brazil comes as the bad guy, where like as a very dangerous guy, or as a very dangerous place. But I would like to put a question mark to that, because the data in itself is one thing, but the lack of data is another. So this is the last stage, which is denial of the genocidal policies. And like I said, this was one of the things that for me was very sad to find out, that most of the liberal democracies that we live in today, or that we are so proud of living today, are not actually as liberal and as defending of everybody and including everybody's human rights as they say. So unfortunately, the cases continue to rise and continue to happen in democratic countries. So unfortunately, up to here, Stanton's framework holds well. So, but the problem for me was that there is something that is happening and it's not being seen, and that has to do with the invisibilization of LGBTQ people. So one of the things that I see is that the killing and the disappearing and the torturing and all these things that happen to LGBTQ people is happening as a fact, but it's not being seen. And I'm like, why is this not being seen? The one thing that I see is that throughout history and throughout geography, this is happening, and yet it becomes such a not tangible thing. And I'm like, why? Why is that silence there? So, like I said, it is happening transversely, and it happens all along, like everywhere and everywhen. And then the one thing that I see here is the very clear denial of the personhood, and the fact that denial allows for further violence to happen. And then the other thing that happens here is that we can see there's an erasure of personhood in terms of law and in terms of history, in terms of selective memory. Much of what has been done by LGBTQ people around the world has been deleted, both in terms of the violence that has happened against the community, but also in terms of the contributions that these communities have done to the world. This willy-nilly to Foucault's theory of power and the idea that power is diffuse and is everywhere, and it's knowledge, and it's disciplinary, and it's the biopower. So all the theory of Foucault became very alive. And again, I mentioned the idea when I was talking about the disappearing in my skin. When I crossed these two ideas, the idea of invisibilization and all Stanton's framework on the LGBTQ community, Foucault became very real to me. Foucault, like the idea of this power that is everywhere and we don't see it, became very, very clear to me. So this takes me to my next point in the presentation, which is the fact that not all genocides are the same. So there are different kinds of genocides, and it can be defined by law, it can be defined by history, but it can be defined by the acts and things of that sort. But then there's something else. There's something that I still see happening, and I don't see how. So this is where I kind of see Stanton's framework, I wouldn't say failing, but I see it perhaps incomplete. So this took me to the idea that not all genocides are the same. And I'm not going to go in detail into this, but by definition, you can have many different ways of understanding what genocide is. So what happens is that the most understood or the most accepted idea of genocide is the UN Convention of Against Genocide of 1948, which is the most important legal framework that we have. But this legal framework has a very strong problem, and that is that this law as such only understands genocide in terms of 4 groups, which is national groups, ethnic groups, racial groups, and religious groups. So whenever the 10 stages of genocide that we saw on Stanton happen, and they are applied to these 4 groups, then the law says, like, yes, this is a genocide. But then what happens if you have a group that doesn't fit in any of these 4 categories? Then the law is flooded. So this is only to bring the idea that genocide can be understood in many ways and can present itself in many ways, and not everybody understands it, and not everybody acts against genocide in the same way. Again, I'm not going to go into the details of the definitions, but all I'm bringing here is that genocide can be understood in many different ways. Historically speaking, the idea of genocide is also different, and the way we tell the stories and the way those stories permeate into policy is also different. So a very clear example is when we talk of the genocide of Armenia, which happened in 1915 through the end of World War I. Today, it was a genocide, but the funny thing about that is that the word genocide as such did not exist when this happened. So can we apply the word Armenian genocide when the word genocide as such didn't exist? This leaves you like with a question mark regarding how we use current words or current frameworks to understand what happened in the past, and it's a little bit of an uncomfortable fact that we need to confront when we're thinking about genocide or mass killings or mass atrocities. And then another example is the fact that the Holocaust in European history is very present, but at the same time, it's also very denied. We all know that we have groups of people that are accepting of it, and some groups who deny that it happened. And kind of the same happened with the Rwandan genocide, where we see the Rwandan genocide not only as happening in Rwanda, but as a consequence of the situation that was happening outside, and mainly the relation to the governments of the historical governments of Belgium and the relationship with the local Tutsis and Hutsus. So again, what I mean to say with this is that the historical aspect of mass killing or genocide is also something that gives us a nuanced understanding of how genocide happens. And with this in mind, this takes me back to the idea of, is there a genocide happening to the LGBTQ community? Is this something that has been happening and we haven't seen it? Probably because we didn't have the language to express what was happening. I leave it as a question mark. It's not a final finding on my own. Then the facts on the ground, what I mean by this is that sometimes genocide might be happening and nobody really knows. And the examples of the Holocaust and Rwanda are very clear, or Cambodia, or even Armenia. These are cases that did happen. But then you have cases of, for example, what happened in Bosnia or Darfur, where genocide did not happen. Bosnia was clearer, but in the case of Darfur, there is not such a strong policy as it was in Nazi Germany, but it did happen and it continues to happen. And in the case of Darfur, you don't have the killing of the soldiers going and killing civilians as it happened in Rwanda, for example, or in the Holocaust. But what you do have is the government pushing the people to go and live in the desert. So it's the desert who is actually carrying out the killing. And it's the policies behind that pushing of the people that is making the genocide happen. But this is not recognized as such. We also know about the idea, this is very popular now, we talk about the idea of cultural genocide, and cases like Australia or Canada. And in the case of Argentina, the whole indigenous communities were killed when the Spanish colonization happened. So this is also real, but it's still not really recognized as such. And then the last thing that I would like to say, this takes me back to Professor Radford on the idea of humiliation. When you have systems that systematically humiliate people and they put the people outside, then people lose their own power, the power to come across and do the things that they need to do. So all these factors add to the idea of genocide as being a very multifaceted kind of event, kind of phenomena. So I'm not going to go in detail of Foucault. I mentioned why, for me, this was a very important kind of understanding. Like Foucault, for me, kind of explained the crossing of why LGBTQ plus communities may have been victims of a genocide, but they have been unseen. And I definitely think that one of the idea of powers of knowledge, we all tend to believe that what we believe is the truth, and then we do not understand anything outside of that. And that takes me very clearly much to, as a person who comes from a Christian background, to the fact that people will be using the Bible against the very existence of LGBTQ people. So when you take the fact that the Bible would say LGBT or gay people or homosexuals are an abomination, and you don't question that, that kind of gives you the power to go and kill those people. And then the same happens with the idea of disciplinary power, where you have the idea that power is so subtle, it's so embedded in us that we don't even notice. And as a gay person, definitely in many cases, I've been a victim of my own hiding, perhaps, or of a victim of staying in the safe ground, of not becoming more active and more visible and more engaged with the LGBTQ community. I didn't need it, or I felt that that was not safe. So power was clearly working there against me as a part of this collective. No? So this is for Foucault. And then the one conclusion that I can get out of this is that genocide doesn't need to have bullets. Bullets, as we have seen them, or gas chambers, or machetes, as we saw in Rwanda, or the gas chambers in Germany, are not the only way to have a genocide happen. So the one thing that I see here is that the LGBTQ collective has been attacked throughout history and never mentioned. There has been a lot of criminalization and moral condemnation, which is the foundations of erasure. I did mention my experience in Iran, and I think that that's very clear. The fact that when you're criminalized for who you are, you tend to hide yourself. And then when you hide yourself, that allows for the whole community to just disappear. There is the issue of colonialism and the global spread of anti-LGBTQ structures. This is something that I see that is happening, and it's very disturbing, and at the same time, I don't know how to address it. The fact that 100, 200, 300 years ago, colonialism from Europe brought this idea of anti-LGBTQ through the world. So many countries in Africa, for example, and most of the countries in Latin America are very good examples of how these countries inherited these laws or these rules or these ideas from colonial powers. And they became very anti-LGBTQ at some point. But then now, interestingly, what happens is that as the pro-LGBTQ movements are happening, then these conservative groups are using the idea of this new LGBTQ propaganda is neocolonialism. So in spite of the fact that this, as a reality, LGBTQ communities have always existed everywhere, these conservative groups are saying that this is a new thing coming from the West, which in fact, what I want you to see is like there's a contradiction here on the idea of colonialism and neocolonialism. They are kind of like contradicting themselves, and there's some kind of hypocrisy clearly happening in this that is allowing for this genocide without bullets. The fact that science and medicine, especially medicine, has been used to see the LGBTQ as a pathology, as people who are sick, and now they're even saying that this is contagious. So this, again, I kind of look back to the stages of Stanton and how genocide happens, in the sense that when you use science to say these are the people that are bad, or these are the people that are sick, or these are the people that need to be put aside, in a way you are legitimizing all these genocidal policies, and this continues to happen. Then another factor that I see happening again and again through the data that I saw was that militarism and authoritarianism definitely contribute to the annihilation of LGBTQ collective. One of the things that I see is that in most cases, the more militaristic a country is and the more authoritarian the country is, policies tend to be more anti-LGBTQ. It's not always the case, but in like 85% of the cases that I analyzed, that was very clear. The connection was very clear. And then the last thing about this genocide without bullets has to do with the fact that currently there exists mechanisms that structurally and slowly allow for violence to happen. And then in this, what I see is that democracies are complicit. This is happening. Very developed democracies in today's world continue to allow for that to happen. And I will show you the data, and you will see what I mean in a minute. So basically, what I see is that there is a transversal, historical, and geographical cumulative data of what genocide against the LGBTQ might look like. So what I see from the data is that this attacks against this collective is constant, it's slow, it's culturally approved. Many, if not all countries in the world kind of allow one way or another for this kind of violence to happen. And then unfortunately that it is legally sustained. There are countries that continue to allow for these things to happen, even if they are democracies. So I would like to take you back to this graph. Again, this is not a graph used by Stanton, but this is what, if you use the Stanton framework, this is what you would look. These are the events that you would look that would tell you this is probably a genocide. And what I want to say, what I would like to show is that my data kind of goes like this, like the red line across. It's not so much about the events in themselves and how they relate to the period or the country that they're taking at, but they have to do with something that is more transversal. It happens in almost every country. It happens throughout history, in most of the periods of history, at least in the 19th, 20th, and 21st centuries. So there is a slow yet progressive killing and attacking and disappearing and erasing of the LGBTQ plus community. So with this in mind, the next step that I took in this process was I did remember Peter Drucker, who is considered to be the father of management, of the science of management. And Drucker would say something, it's not exact the quote, but he says something on the lines of, you cannot manage what you cannot measure. So you need to measure things. You need to understand what the situation is like in order to manage it. And one of the things that I see with the LGBTQ plus community is we don't know. Like most of these things are kind of like, what is happening there? Why is this so silent? So this took me to my next step, which was like, how many people are being killed? How many LGBTQ people are being killed each year due to gender reasons? And here I would like to ask the audience, like, do you guys have any idea? Mute yourself or put something on the chat if you want to. But does anybody have any idea of the estimated number of LGBTQ people that are killed around the world in every year due to gender reasons? Is there anybody who could guess? No? No idea? Thank you, Nati. But it's an interesting thing that we have, and the only answer I could find to this was that there is very little known about this. And it's crazy because when you have data tells you something. But when you don't have the data, when that data is not existing, that also tells you something. The very lack of data tells you something. So this took me to the idea of what we see in the data. And one of the things that One of the things that I saw first was that the killing of transgender people is the only one thing that is actually being recorded formally. So there is an organization called Trans Murder, sorry, I can't read it myself, it's too small, monitoring, the TMM. And they monitored the killing of trans people around the world. And what they found out is like in year 22-23, something like 220 people in the trans community were killed. And in 23-24, in the period 23-24, 350 people were killed. Now, the issue with this is that these numbers are very on the low side, and these numbers are very, very conservative. So, okay, we can imagine that in 2025, something like 350 people in the trans community were killed around the world. But we have to consider two things. One, this is a very conservative number. And two, there's a lot of underreporting. There's a lot of killing that happens and it's not actually being reported. Come on, my slides are not moving. Okay. I don't know why am I, okay, then. The other thing that we have, I'm going to the point number 2, is that the country, there's a big discrepancies in the data between countries and civil society, how they tally, how they count the numbers. Usually what happens with the country is that in most countries, surprisingly, there is no special tally for the killing of LGBTQ people as such. So people will be killed, and that's it. There is no further digging into why or how or what motivated that killing. And then the other thing is, in many countries, what happens is that it's not the governments who are gathering this information, but it's the civil society. So some communities in the like the NGOs or groups of people that gather information on the LGBTQ side. So the tallies and the numbers are very different. But then the next point, which is the wide human right underestimations. The interesting thing about this is, like, whenever you look at the big organizations like Human Rights Watch or Amnesty International, or like all these big major human rights organizations, they always systematically mention the fact that LGBTQ issues are usually not reported properly. They continue to mention the fact that this data, although the cases do exist, the data does not. So here we have an issue of we do not know. I'm going back to Nati's comment in the chat, no idea. We have no idea what is happening with the LGBTQ people in general. So there's the big issue of official documented numbers are very different from reality, and this has to do with underreporting and misclassification. The fact that many people are killed and we don't know. You will see, I was mentioning the case of Brazil. Brazil comes as a very deadly country, but then I'll show you that this is probably not the case as we can imagine. And this has to do with the way that things are reported in Brazil and not reported in other countries. And then there's the issue of misclassification. Not all the killings are reported as LGBTQ related killings, and not all of them are investigated in a way that gender issues might have been the motivators of the killing. Then there's a big issue with the underestimations and the different ways of monitoring. Not everybody, not all the countries monitor this in the same way, so the data is not existing. And then when we cannot compare the data, I take you back to Peter Drucker and the idea that if you do not know the numbers, if you cannot be accountable or manage the data, then quite unlikely you will be able to manage this situation. And then the other thing is that data is very context dependent. It's not the same thing to be an LGBTQ people here in Japan as it is in DRC Congo or as it is in Argentina. So these definitions and the way that each country defines people affects how data is gathered or not gathered. So if I'm going to go back to a rough estimate of the LGBTQ plus people being killed around the world, it's interesting because the number that I kind of came across, it's not real, but it kind of come across, is that somewhere between 1,000 to 5,000 people in the LGBTQ plus community seem to be killed every year around the world. So I want you to remember 1,000 to 5,000. It is a very rough estimate, and it's how this number is done. It's like it's based on the idea that, remember that trans people are the only one that are systematically being recorded. So if in 2024 there were something like 350 people being killed in a very conservative number and in kind of reporting number, that gives us the idea that perhaps if we were able to dig a little deeper and added the LGB, so not just the trans community, but all the other people in the community, then the number would definitely increase. So if we think about the fact that only 350 trans people were reported, that is very low and is very conservative. That doesn't include the LGB people and other queer people in the community. Then that takes us up to a number somewhere around 1,000 to 5,000 people estimated to be killed. But then again, I take full responsibility over the fact that this is a very speculative outcome. But when you think about 1,000 to 5,000 people probably being killed just because of their gender, this takes me back to something that for me was very interesting. And then I want to show you something about the data. I have been mentioning Brazil again and again. So this is one of the graphs in the trans murder report. You can see Brazil has 100 cases and Argentina has 8 cases, and then the US and Canada come there. But if you see in this report, there's 0 case reported in Europe, there's 0 case reported in Africa, there's 0 case reported in Russia or China or Japan. So what does that tell you? That tells you that that data does not exist. But the fact that data doesn't exist doesn't mean that the killing is not happening. So this is an important case of what the data that doesn't exist tell you something very important. So in order to balance this, I've been looking for data on LGBTQ in general and how it works. This is the best thing that I found so far, this book called LGBTQ Stats. It is a bit old, it's from 2017, but it's very interesting in the sense that it's a very consolidated approach to how the experiences of LGBTQ community in regards to violence happens. So for me, again, this is not to be taken as the Bible, but it is a number. It is a number, and it takes me back to Drucker. Like, if we know these numbers, could we manage the situation any better? I do believe so. So this takes me to the next idea. That is the problem with the LGBTQ. If there's a genocide happening, the fact is nobody's tracking. Nobody knows. Is this happening throughout the world? We don't know. And then the other thing that takes me here that I was able to think out of the data is that not all available data is reliable. So when you think of Brazil, when they present Brazil as the killer of trans people or the #1 dangerous place for LGBTQ people, I do warn you about the fact that data does not say all. The lack of data is data. So probably it's important to understand that there are places that are not reported and they are probably more dangerous. And then the last thing is, regarding the idea of genocide and LGBTQ people, is the fact that there's very, very, very limited cooperation internationally among countries in terms of gathering this data and in terms of sharing this data. So that is what is happening in terms of data, no? So that takes me to my next point, which is for those of us who are working in the peace and conflict area, one of the things that we see a lot is the definitions of war. And I'm going to be quick on this. I think that everybody is aware of this. The Uppsala definition of war, what the Uppsala University in Sweden defines war to be. And like the definition goes on and on and on, but at some point they do say that an armed conflict, so at the bottom of the screen, no, an armed conflict is labeled as war when the results are at least 1,000 battle-related deaths in a single calendar year. Now, if we think that this is war, this is a definition of war, 1,000 related deaths in a year, and we think about the fact that at least 1,000 to 5,000 LGBTQ people are being killed around a cycle of a year, then would it be legitimate to think of that as a form of war? Again, I don't have an answer to this. This is more of a question than anything. And then I'm going to go very quickly to the last point of my presentation, which is the idea of selective peace building. In order to relate this presentation to the topic of the Peace Week this year, what I did was I looked into different formal peace building operations, mainly organized by the United Nations, and I noticed that there are 2 big trends. There are those operations that do consider LGBTQ people, and there are those that do not. So, sorry, the slides are not moving. I don't know why. It's so there's issues with the principles. Sometimes the peace building operations in principle forget or ignore or neglect categories such as the LGBTQ people. So in principle, those are ideas that should be there and they're not. And in practice, what happens is that many policies or mandates neglect completely the experiences of LGBTQ people. There is a very clear assumption that in conflict, everything is heterosexual. So there's always men and women and children, but there's very rarely a gray zone allowing for LGBTQ experiences in conflict. And then the one thing that I want to mention here is that omissions are not natural or neutral, and they reproduce the systemic idea of erasure. So remember when I mentioned the idea that if there's no data, you cannot manage? Well, in peace-building operations, it usually happens that there is no data. It's very limited the amount of data that people are using for addressing LGBTQ needs. And the fact that neglect obviously can allow for further violence. And I definitely think that neglect is not accidental. So then probably you start seeing why I am a little bit critical of how peace building may actually be contributing to genocide. I'm not going to go in detail in this. Unfortunately, we don't have the time, but this is more or less the data that I found in terms of how formal peace building is failing in terms of principle. So what I did here was look at the operations in different countries, like in Kosovo, like in Bosnia, like in Rwanda, not Rwanda, in Somalia, and so on. And look at how these operations were built in principle. What were the ideas in the principles that led this? And how these operations did not have anything related to LGBTQ people. So by not talking about it, by not bringing this issue to the table, they are contributing to further erasing LGBTQ experiences in conflict. The same applies to failure in practice. So this, again, these are examples. This is more or less the data that I've been looking at how these organizations that create LGBT peace building operations, and then when they bring it to the ground, they forget or they ignore or they neglect the fact that LGBTQ experiences actually do happen. And it's even more aggravating when it has been noted and recorded that sometimes it is the people in the peace-building operations who actually carry out the violence against LGBTQ people or the discrimination against LGBTQ people. So in this sense, peace-building operations can and actually are contributing to genocidal policies against the community of the LGBTQ community. Then I also looked at data on the flip side, examples of where peace building in principle has been including the LGBTQ experiences, and cases like in Kosovo or cases like in Colombia have shown that this can be done. So there is a rising level of awareness here. The other thing that was interesting here for me, sorry, it's repeated, but the UN, the toolkit for queering women, peace and security, this is a document that is used throughout the UN in the development of new peace-building operations. And then one of the things is that this document is bringing the idea that we need to bring the LGBTQ into the way operations are designed and actually implemented. So again, these are all the examples. And another important thing here is the fact that there should be a strong connection with the civil society. This is, again, the same idea, but in practice. So these are examples of peace-building operations that have, in fact, brought LGBTQ or queering theories into how the peace-building is happening on the ground. So this takes me to the last part of my slide. This is like what I have learned about this is that in terms of peace-building and LGBTQ people, we still have some blind spots. We still have some issues that need to be addressed and they're pending. But on the positive side, which is the learning in progress side, I do see that, like I mentioned in Colombia or Kosovo, these are examples of where peace building has become more democratic and inclusive. So I'm not going to go into the details of this, but this is perhaps one of the most important conclusions that I could get from the data in terms of how formal peace-building operations are including or not the experiences of people in the collective. So my final conclusion for this is that invisibilization is a stage of genocide, and it provides the for peace building. I very much enjoy learning about genocide with Douglas, and I felt that Stanton's framework for me was a fundamental place to understand how it works. But I did feel that it was incomplete, and this research is showing me why. So the fact that we need to address invisibilization, I would probably add it as one of Stanton's stages, is one of the things that peace building programs need to acknowledge, because otherwise they become, if peace building programs do not include the idea of invisibilization, they are actually contributing to what we saw with Foucault on the idea of power being underneath and managing the situations without us knowing. So in general, conflict and assessment needs to be more inclusive of the data. We need more data. This is not happening, and it needs to happen. Otherwise, we are neglecting a whole amount of people that are existing and they're not being accounted for. We need to have more training for peace buildings and peace builders and mediators, and that the fact that LGBTQ participation is important in all the processes, including the transitional justice and reconciliation processes. So these are my last conclusions. Yes, so basically the idea of invisibilization is foundational. It's a form of genocide. It is clear, it happens, and nobody's seeing it. In some of the slides, I mentioned this as the little stone in our shoe or the huge elephant in our room. Like, which one is it? The fact that LGBTQ people are being excluded from peace building happens, and we're not seeing it. So, or is it that we see it like in the stone in the shoe and we feel it, but we kind of like, or is it so big? Is it so amazing that we're just paralyzed and we don't know how to address it? So this takes me to my last slide. Sorry, I wanted to give more time for questions and comments, but we all have seen this. And this is not my last slide. This is my last slide. I think that this is very telling. And if this is happening in very formal kind of legal processes, and how invisibilization is happening in legal processes that are more mainstream, you can imagine what happens underneath. So for me, in this picture, the interesting thing is the gray zone underneath. I don't know if you can see it, the gray zone underneath the person that is on the floor. For me, this is what this picture tells me. This gray zone exists and nobody's paying attention to it. So this is all from me. Thank you very much. And sorry that I wanted to keep more time for comments and questions, but
no, you're good. Fernando, we can go another 10, 15 minutes if people have questions.
Okay. So yeah, that was all from me. And wow, I haven't talked in this speed for a good while. So yeah, I would love to hear your comments or your questions or what do you think. Thank you, Amber.
Yep, if anyone wants to unmute or raise their hand, comments, questions.
Thank you, Julia. I see your comments, and Ciara, and everybody on the chat. Thank you, guys. Thanks, Nantu. I've been looking at you and looking at the things that you've been posting in LinkedIn, and I hope your family are doing well. I think of you guys a lot. Unfortunately, I have to say the work that I did in peace building in Burma was yet another example of how LGBT are not included. I worked in the Burma-Thailand border for over 2 years, directly with refugees issues, and this was not an issue. It was never there. So that gives me another.
Sorry, Fernando.
Yeah.
Looks like we have some questions. Hands
Sure.
raised. Sierra?
First of all, that was so interesting, and thank you. For others, Fernando and I are trying to coordinate some other queer research, and so this is like, it's great to hear how this like applies and how this might be able to apply to the research we're doing. But I was wondering, I know that in conflict studies, because we're usually dealing with war, there's all these different ways to try and get counts for how many people have been killed in different like conflict zones. And because this isn't standardized, it's not all happening in the same way, I know it's a lot harder to get those counts. I was wondering, just kind of like hypothetically, if you think there is a way that we're able to backtrack and like retroactively get that data, just because it feels like it's one of those things that's kind of hard to put your hands on, especially if countries are not willing to express that this is even happening.
I love your question, and it does take me back to the idea of history, applying history to what we know now. Unfortunately, I don't think it's possible, and it's not because it's not technical. I think that it would be possible to do that kind of research and dig deeper into who has been killed and why. It would definitely be possible, but unfortunately, what I do see here is a huge lack of political will. There's no political will at the country level in most countries to actually go deeper into opening cases and researching or reinvestigating cases that have been already closed. I love the idea. I think that you are bringing a wonderful point. But that, again, takes me back to the idea of the stone in the shoe or the elephant in the room. People don't want to do it. And the fact that they don't want to do it, it takes me back to Foucault and the fact that the power is there, and they are, this lack of data, this lack of addressing these historical cases is a very good example of putting the LGBTQ people under the rug and just forgetting about them. Put them under the rug and forget about it. So I think that that's the policy. And I love what you're bringing up, Ciara, because it's real. And again, the lack of data is data.
Yeah. And I would assume that there's a level of, you just first have to classify it as something that can be like a cultural, I remember, what did you say? It was like national, religious, like the different groups that would classify under genocide. Like you'd first have to like add it to that before probably people would even consider thinking about doing the research on it.
Yeah. Thanks you. Thanks for the clip that you sent me about what is happening in New York now.
Yeah.
I was very surprised. I was like, okay, we were talking about how people are being pulled out or outed in Egypt through Grindr. This is something that I found in my own research, and then Ciara shared to me some information that is happening today in New York. So beware. In the chat from Douglas, how could you go about building data of anti-LGBTQ violence or on peace-building programs? I will be very honest with you about this. There were two, when I was doing this research, there were two things. One is I started looking, what is there? What are my searches on Google or ChatGPT or like into the literature? I was looking like, what is there? I was very badly surprised, very sadly surprised about the fact that I couldn't really find much. So to answer your question of how, I honestly don't know. Like there's no, the black hole is so big, you know where to attack it from, where to start from. So if I were to answer that question of how to address that black hole, the only one thing I can think of two things. One is break it down into smaller pieces. So for example, the fact that trans killings are being monitored, but LG and B are not, that is one thing that needs to be addressed. So it's very sad to see that trans people are being killed, but it's promising to see that this is being monitored. So I think that we have a lesson to learn from there. That's one thing. So start breaking the whole black box into smaller niches and kind of start working on those niches, one thing. The second thing that I see very, very important is that there's a lot of disconnect between what happens at the level of the state and the governments and the police and the formal justice systems as compared to what happens in civil society. In many cases, like Brazil, I bring it back because Brazil is a very interesting example. In Brazil, what happens is that the organizations at the community level are the ones that are actually monitoring more. So this data, unfortunately, what happens with this data is that, as they say here in Japanese, it becomes bara-bara, it becomes very dispersed. So it's difficult to bring it down to a consolidated way of gathering and putting that data together. But the fact that it is happening tells you something about the civil society that the government is not seeing. So the second thing that I would address here is empower the civil society to become your partner in terms of data gathering, and strengthen the communication between both the government and the civil society. And then there's one more thing that is more important, is the fact that the governments tend to neglect that data. In countries like, I will tell you from Argentina, there are some organizations that are producing this kind of data, and you don't see the impact that this data should have on the work of the police. So strengthening that communication and strengthening that the usefulness of that data. And then very unfortunately for countries in the Middle East, most of Africa, Russia, Chechnya, this data is not collected at all. So how do we address that? I don't know. Like, I really have no, I don't know, like that needs to, the cultural change that needs to happen in these countries is so huge that, again, it becomes a huge black hole that the only thing that you can do is start taking small pieces and chipping in. I don't know if I addressed your question, Douglas, but if you have something, I would love to hear what you say. I'm sure you have a lot to say here.
Thank you, Fernando. We did have a hand raised before you got to Doug. Jamie, do you want to ask your question? I think you just put it in the chat, but we can go to Jamie, and then I think we have two more in the chat as well after that.
Oh wow, there's quite a number in the chat. Sorry guys, I didn't see. So if you want to raise your hand again and do it, or just unmute yourself. I see.
Jamie, go ahead.
Okay.
I know Jamie was raising his hand before.
Please,
Jamie, go ahead, ask your question. Okay, I think Jamie's shy.
All right.
Okay.
I see Victoria. In your research, has the role of the grief come up in regards to humanizing those invisible, or even the suppressing of grieving practices contributing to invisibilization? No. The answer is no, because I didn't look into that. It's not because it's not happening, it's because I did not tap into the issue of grief. I think that you have a huge point there. This takes me back again very clearly to the idea of Foucault and how power manages people. Grief is definitely one of the things that for us in the LGBTQ people, the community, it makes us quiet. Grief makes us quiet in many ways. And this also contributes to the invisibilization of our experiences. I did not tap into that because I did not have the time, or that was not the focus. But I think that you do have a point there. I think that the management of grief is an important matter that should be more taken into consideration in the peace building operations and in the way they are built. Thank you. Thank you for making me notice that. Then I see another comment or question from Andrea. Maybe this is addressed in the UN toolkit, but how do you include LGBT people process without outing them? Wonderful question. I imagine creating inclusive processes could only work in cultures where people feel safe to be out. Wonderful question, and yes, you're right. There is a risk. There's a huge risk. This is one of the things that Ciara and Nix are working on right now, the issue of how do you create spaces that are safe without outing people that do not want to go out or do not feel safe to be outed. I think that the possibilities are clear. I mentioned that when you're working on peace building, there are two levels. One is the principle level, which is the high level design of things. And then the other one is the practical level, when we actually bring things down. There are a lot of things that you can do on both levels that are, I would say, abstract. They are kind of like rulemaking or education or these kind of things that do not necessarily need people from the receiving side to come out. So for example, if you create, just like you properly mentioned, the UN toolkit, this is a very good example of a policy that is abstract in the sense that this is telling people, this is how we should do it, but this is not telling you, hey, you, Andrea, you should be doing this. So this is like the abstract kind of area, which is safe. Unfortunately, I do think that there's a lot of risk. For those people working in the ground, there is a lot of safety issues that are real. And I don't know. Unfortunately, I don't think, like, if I were working in Uganda or in any of these countries that are very harsh at the moment, I think that it's much safer for these people to stay safe and stay alive than to become very proactive activists that can be killed. So I think that's safety first. That would be my answer to you. Nix, I see your next question. I think one of the lessons we can learn from the increase of data around the trans people is the corresponding rise in anti-trans hate, etc. One question for future would be how to gather data without causing more harm from increased visibility. I love your question, and you know, Nix, we are working on this. This is exactly, you and I and Ciara have been working, like, this is the research that we're working on. Very related to what I just said for the question of Andrea, I think that there are two levels. One is the abstract level of things where things are designed, implemented, and the principle and the ideas there. And the other way is when you go down to the ground. Unfortunately, one of the things that I believe is necessary here in terms of safety is the fact of the use of fake identities. I know that places like Facebook do not allow for you to do that, but this is kind of crazy, but I do think that in many ways, activists in the LGBTQ plus community need to become spies. We need to become, you need to be active in such a way that you are still safe. So it's awful. It's really awful having to say this, but I do feel that many of us become Agent 707. Like, it's dangerous. And but the only way to stay alive is to do it in such a way that people don't know you are you. It's awful, but I see your point and I agree with you. So let's keep our work going. I think that we're going somewhere in there. Then I see Jamie. I wonder, how does intergroup erasure interact with outgroup aggression? Wonderful. There has been a long dismal of bisexual, asexual identities in violation of boundaries. How does the cultural infight exacerbate marginalization? Wonderful question. This is, again, similar to what happened before. This is not one of the issues. Victoria mentioned the problem of grief. What, Jamie, you're bringing up here is, again, one of the things I have not tapped into as such. But it's true, what you're mentioning here is true, that the intergroup violence exists. The intergroup violence and the intergroup or intra-group neglect also exists. It is very clear. We have all seen the fact that gay men like myself, who present themselves as men and like who are open, but we are being the normal gays, as some people are calling us in the US, as compared to trans people. We have seen that these normal gays have become the no, I don't want to have to do with the trans community. And it's like, that's not the way it should be. I totally agree with you. I don't know how to build that bridge. I think that is a matter of education. I think it's a matter of exposure. I do want to say that I was very highly inspired by Nix and Ciara, and I thank you guys for being with me in this research process, because it's a learning process, but you are allowing me to be exposed to things I didn't know before. So, Jamie, to answer your question, I think that the answer to that has to do with exposure. Bringing visibility and being in touch with the problems of people that are not yourself and that are not your inner group is the only way to get to understand what's happening on the other side of the road. I think that exposure would be exposure and information would be, I don't know specifically how to do it, but I think that would go. All right, these are the questions I see in the chat. So if anybody has anyone, Nati, I saw you yesterday. I saw you yesterday in the Colombian presentation. Yes, Natividad.
Yes, hi. Yes, mucho gusto. I'm not a student from here. Somebody invited me to this week, and I have to tell you that I am blown up, especially by this presentation in particular. The ignorance that surrounded my mind around this topic is really big, and there are so many things that I'm now like, wow, understanding. But I guess I really want to congratulate you first on this great presentation. I mean, so clear, so detailed. I want to know if we have access to the slides because it's a very good, it's a very good reference to have. And I guess, it's good to see what this is, but I guess I want to ask, because I feel a little bit disappointed at the same time to see where we're standing at right now. So I guess my question is, what are some of the solutions that can be brought to kind of dissipate this, this impacting genocide that's happening? Are there any more solutions? I know you guys are doing a research and you're moving on that. It will be so good to be able to follow up. I myself would like to start something on these aspects, especially, gay people, LGBTQ community in religion. I am a religious person myself, and there's just a big problem. It's the big elephant in the church, I will call it, the big elephant in the temple. So that's what I would like to kind of focus on. But I feel that your research will be very much a contribution for me in the future. So are there any solutions that can be thought of, even on the surface, that we can talk about? And thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question and the support and for the encouragement. It's been, like I said in the beginning, I am coming from a total stance. I am very well aware. I put it in one of my first slides in terms of positionality. Although I am a member of the LGBTQ plus community, I haven't been engaged with it. So I play guilty. I was completely ignorant about this, and in this. People in the Carter School, especially Douglas as my professor, but then my teams and the people that I had the chance to learn from have been a motivation for me. So I bring again the idea of exposure. I bring again the idea of you cannot love what you don't know. This is an idea from Eric Fromm, who for me is a very, very, like, it blew my mind when I was in my undergrad. And the fact that you cannot love what you don't know. So the only thing that I can bring to this, I appreciate the fact that you mentioned religion. I personally am not a religious person. I'm actually quite on the contrary. I think that religions, in my experience, have been very bad. So I'm very anti-religious kind of thing. But I like the fact that you're bringing the issue that religions too are starting to address the big elephant in the room. So how do you address that? I think it has to do with exposure, and I think it has to do with honest curiosity. When you bring the people in the religious groups into an honest conversation of who are these LGBTQ people, what do they need, what do they want, how do we include them, then you start having a conversation that is starting to open the doors. I honestly haven't seen it. I come from a very Catholic country where I suffered. For me, religion was the opposite. I suffered it. So what I would say is an honest curiosity for the needs of the people in this group. Yeah, that would be my question. And please be welcome to anybody to get in touch with me or with any of us in the team, and we can do something together. I'm super happy and open to do that. I will put my email on the chat right now, so you can reach out anytime. That's my email. So yeah, I don't know. Thank you. It's good to hear you. It's good to see you on that side. It's good to see everybody in the Carter schools. I have to say, I hate the fact that I graduated. I wanted to stay. But yes, I don't know if you have any other comments or questions. I'm super happy to hear from you. Like, not just now, but please be in touch. Do not be a stranger. Thanks to you guys. Thank you for being here. And like, many of you have been a big source of inspiration for me. So thank you. And I have a very opinionated cat that she wants to be a part of it. I don't know if you can hear her, but she's like, meow, 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 meow. So thank you very much. I don't know, any other comments or questions? If not, I would be okay to let you go. Probably you all guys are attending other events in the Carter School. The events are super cool this year, so please do attend them.